She delivered the food soaked wet in the rain. But the billionaire dad called her inside and did something unexpected. The rain was relentless. Sadie Wilkins pedaled against the wind, her body hunched over, trying to shield herself from the heavy drops that felt like needles against her face. The yellow raincoat with the faded logo of the delivery app was useless now. It was soaked and heavy on her shoulders. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She stopped under a tree and checked the message. Delivery time exceeded. Customer is waiting. Sadie sighed. She couldn't afford to lose another job. The rent was due in a few days. She started pedaling again, this time faster. The houses grew larger as she moved through the residential neighborhood. Manicured lawns, gleaming cars, windows showing families gathered in cozy living rooms, a world she only ever observed from the outside. 347 Parkview Lane, a two-story white house with a small porch. Sadie braked, the bicycle tires skidding in the pooled water. She leaned the bike against a tree and pulled the order from the thermal bag. Burgers, fries, and milkshakes. She ran across the lawn, her head down against the rain. When she reached the porch steps, she allowed herself a sigh of relief. One more delivery almost done. That's when it happened. The first step, treacherously slick. Her worn-out sneaker slipped. A second of imbalance was all it took. Sadie felt her body fall backward. Her arms flailed in the air, searching for something to grab onto where there was nothing. The package slipped from her hands. She landed sitting on the step, watching in horror as the disaster unfolded. The burgers slid out of their wrappers. The fries scattered. The milkshake formed a pink puddle that mixed with the rainwater. No, 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 she muttered to herself. The front door opened. A man appeared, tall, around 35, with slightly messy brown hair. He looked at Sadie, still sitting on the step, then at the scattered food, and back at her. What surprised Sadie wasn't the man himself, but the lack of irritation in his gaze. There was no anger there, just a kind of quiet curiosity. It was then that she noticed a second pair of eyes, partially hidden behind the man's leg. A little girl was watching the scene, hair as golden as sunbeams, tied in a loose braid. Her eyes, a crystalline blue, were large and attentive. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. "I'm so sorry, sir." Sadie got up quickly, ignoring the pain in her hip, her cheeks burning with shame. "I slipped, and I'll call the restaurant right now. They can send another order at no extra charge. I'm so sorry for the trouble." The words came out almost automatically. She braced herself for the inevitable reaction, the disapproving glare, a few harsh words, maybe a demand to speak to a supervisor. But the man just stood there, watching her. The little girl took a small step forward, still partially shielded by her father's presence. Her eyes scanned the disaster on the ground and then settled on Sadie. "Have you eaten today?" The question caught Sadie by surprise. She blinked a few times, confused. "What?" she asked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "I asked if you've eaten today," he repeated, his tone calm. "It's raining hard. You must have been making deliveries for hours." Sadie opened her mouth and closed it again, bewildered. Was this some kind of trick? A way to get her to admit negligence? She tried to remember the last time she had eaten anything besides that quick sandwich at the start of her shift. Was it 10 hours ago, 12? The days had been blurring together lately. She started, but cut herself off. The truth was, she couldn't remember. The man opened the door wider and gestured inside the house. "We have enough food. Come in and have dinner with us." The little blonde girl finally smiled, a small, shy smile that lit up her face. She looked at her father, then at Sadie, as if waiting for an answer. Sadie hesitated. Her entire life was built around unwritten rules of survival. Entering a stranger's house was never one of them. "You don't have to. I can order another meal for you and—" "We're not offering because of the lost food," he said, shaking his head slightly. "We're offering because it's raining, it's nighttime, and no one should have to work hungry." The simplicity of the offer disarmed her. There was no game in those words, no hidden meaning, just straightforward kindness. Sadie felt something strange stir in her chest. Not quite gratitude, not yet, but maybe the first sign that very old walls can develop tiny cracks. "If I came back with this order, I'd be fired," she said finally, her gaze meeting his with raw sincerity. "Thank you for not making me lose anything else today." The man just nodded and opened the door wider. "I'm Miles. This is my daughter, June." The little blonde girl waved shyly, her blue eyes never leaving Sadie's face, as if she were looking at a fascinating mystery. "Sadie," she replied, hesitating for another moment before stepping inside, leaving the rain and cold behind. The inside of the house was cozy, but remarkably simple for the size of the property. A living room with comfortable sofas, a few toys organized in a corner, books stacked on the coffee table. The smell of something cooking filled the air, mac and cheese, Sadie identified, the kind of aroma that made empty stomachs remember they exist. "You can leave your coat there," Miles pointed to a coat rack near the door. "The bathroom is the first door on the right, if you want to dry your face." As she hung up her drenched raincoat, Sadie noticed June watching her with curious eyes. The girl seemed to want to say something but remained silent, just studying the unexpected visitor. "I'll finish heating up dinner," Miles said, walking toward the kitchen. "Make yourself at home." In the small bathroom, Sadie stared at her reflection in the mirror, blonde hair, darkened by the water, stuck to her pale face, tired, light-colored eyes. How long had it been since someone had invited her to lower her guard? She couldn't remember. When she returned to the living room, June was sitting on the sofa, flipping through a storybook. Seeing Sadie, the girl smiled again, this time with more confidence. "Do you like mac and cheese?" Miles asked from the kitchen, his voice carrying a surprising naturalness, as if Sadie were an expected guest, not a drenched stranger who had ruined his dinner. "Yes," she answered, surprised by her own voice, which sounded softer than its usual defensive tone. "I do." When she crossed that threshold, Sadie didn't know she was entering a place that would change her life forever. She didn't know that this simple gesture, a dinner offered on a rainy night, would be the beginning of something she never imagined possible for someone like her. All she knew was that, for the first time in a long time, someone had opened a door when she needed it most. And for some reason she couldn't explain, she had chosen to walk through it. 2 weeks passed since that rainy night. Sadie pedaled through the same streets as always, delivering food to people who barely noticed her existence. The job was the same, but something inside her had changed. That unexpected dinner, the kindness of that man and the smile of the little girl remained like a small light in her memory. The app buzzed in her pocket. New order, 347 Parkview Lane. Sadie felt a jolt in her chest. Miles and June's house. She hadn't been back there since that night. She had thought about them a few times, wondering how they were, but she never thought she'd see them again. Fate, or perhaps just the randomness of the app's algorithm, had decided otherwise. The sky was clear today, a light blue that looked like a painting. Sadie pedaled without rushing, enjoying the gentle late-afternoon sun that warmed her face. The order in the thermal bag was simple, a medium pizza and a soda. As she turned onto Parkview Lane, she spotted the white house with the small porch. It looked different in the sunlight, more welcoming, less imposing. The front yard had flowers she hadn't noticed in the darkness of the rainy night. Sadie parked her bike and took out the order. She carefully walked up the steps, the same ones she had slipped on. This time they were completely dry. She rang the doorbell and waited, nervously tucking a strand of blonde hair that had escaped her helmet. The door opened, but it wasn't Miles who was there. It was June, with her huge blue eyes and blonde hair pulled back in a clumsy ponytail. The girl was wearing denim overalls and a yellow t-shirt with a giraffe design. For a moment, Sadie thought the child wouldn't remember her. After all, it had just been one night, weeks ago, but June's face lit up with immediate recognition. "It's you," she exclaimed, with a joy so pure and genuine it caught Sadie off guard. "Daddy! Daddy!" "It's Sadie." Before Sadie could say anything, June rushed forward and hugged her around the waist. A strong, spontaneous hug, the kind kids give without calculating consequences or weighing intentions. The kind of hug Sadie hadn't received in so long, she had almost forgotten what it felt like. "Hi, June," Sadie said, her voice softening automatically. Her free hand rested hesitantly on the girl's hair. "You came back," June continued, looking up without letting go of Sadie's waist. "I told Daddy you would come back." "I'm just delivering a pizza," Sadie explained gently, holding up the package as evidence. Miles appeared in the hallway, coming from what looked like an office at the back of the house. He was wearing jeans and a light blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked more rested than the first time Sadie had seen him. "June, let Sadie breathe," he said, a smile on his lips. "She's working." June reluctantly released her hug but stayed by Sadie's side, looking at her as if she were some kind of rediscovered treasure. "Pizza and a soda," Sadie said, handing the order to Miles. "Punctual as always," he replied, taking the package. For a second, his fingers brushed against hers during the handoff, a casual, meaningless touch, but one that Sadie felt like a small electric current running up her arm. "Thanks," Miles continued. "Want to come in?" "We have enough pizza." The offer caught her off guard. Could this be a coincidence? Another night, another invitation to dinner? "Please, stay," June pleaded, pulling on the hem of Sadie's jacket. "I want to show you my drawings." Sadie hesitated, glancing at her watch. She had 2 more deliveries to make, and her supervisor was already keeping an eye on her times. But there was something in June's hopeful eyes, in that welcoming house, that made it hard to say no. Just for a few minutes, she gave in, allowing herself to be pulled inside by June's insistent little hand. The house seemed brighter and airier in the daylight. Light curtains danced with the breeze coming through the open windows. In the living room, the same comfortable sofas. But now Sadie noticed details she had missed on her first visit. Framed photos of June at different ages, shelves with children's books, and a few toys organized in colorful boxes. "Look," June said, running to a small table in the corner of the room and returning with several sheets of paper. "So I drew you." Sadie took the drawing. It was a stick figure with long yellow hair standing next to a smaller figure also with yellow hair. They were both holding what looked like a plate. "That's us eating mac and cheese," June explained, proud. "And this is Daddy." She pointed to a third, taller stick figure with brown hair. "It's beautiful, June," Sadie said, genuinely touched. She had never been the subject of a child's drawing before. "I have more," June announced, spreading out several other drawings. "This is from the park. This is from school. This is my teacher." As June excitedly showed off her art collection, Sadie noticed Miles watching them from the kitchen doorway. There was something in his gaze, a mixture of tenderness and curiosity, that made her feel strangely exposed, as if he could see past the layers of protection she had built around herself. "She's talked about you," Miles said, when June ran to get more drawings from her room. "After that night, the rain lady, she calls you." Sadie didn't know what to say. The idea that someone thought of her when she wasn't around was almost uncomfortable in its newness. "She's a special kid," was all she could manage to say. "Yes, she is," Miles agreed, a soft smile crossing his face. There was a pause, one of those moments where the silence feels heavy with something unsaid. Then, he continued, "She seems at ease with you. Would you like to look after her some afternoons?" The question caught Sadie completely off guard. She looked at Miles, certain she had misheard. "Look after her? Like a babysitter?" Miles nodded, leaning against the doorframe. "I work from home, but I have online meetings 3 afternoons a week. June gets bored, and I get distracted worrying about her. It would be from 2 to 6. He paused. "I pay well, better than the delivery app, I'm sure." Sadie looked toward the hallway where June had disappeared. She heard the girl's voice humming something in her room. There was something about that child that drew her in. A purity, a simple joy that Sadie had forgotten existed in the world. "So I don't have any experience with kids," she admitted. "I've never been a babysitter." "But she likes you," Miles replied, as if that solved everything. "And I trust my gut. You seem trustworthy." Trustworthy. The word echoed inside Sadie. When was the last time someone had considered her worthy of trust, especially with something as precious as a child? "Sarge, what do you say?" Miles asked, his voice gentle, without pressure. Sadie should have thought carefully, weighed the pros and cons, considered how she would fit it into her already tight delivery schedule, but the answer came before she could fully analyze it. "Yes," she said. "So I can try." Miles's smile widened, his eyes lighting up in a way that made something stir inside Sadie's chest. "Great. Can you start on Monday?" As they settled the details, hours, payment, what June liked to do, Sadie felt a strange mix of emotions. The money would be welcome, of course. Anything that helped her get off the bike for a few hours, especially now that summer was approaching, was a blessing. But there was something more, something she wasn't used to feeling. The sense of being wanted, of being needed not just as an anonymous cog in a delivery machine, but as a person. Someone wanted her around, and that was new. When she finally said goodbye, with June demanding a farewell hug and making her promise to come back on Monday, Sadie pedaled to her next delivery with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. The unexpected invitation lingered in her mind like a small promise. A door opened a crack to something she couldn't yet name, but that, for the first time in a long time, made her look forward with something resembling hope. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays took on a new meaning for Sadie. They were no longer just days of pedaling under the sun or in the rain, delivering food to nameless faces. Now at 2 in the afternoon, she would park her bike in front of the White House on Parkview Lane and leave behind for a few hours the loneliness that had been her only constant companion for years. A month had passed since she started looking after June. A month that, surprisingly, had turned a task she had accepted for the money into something she looked forward to with almost eager anticipation. That Thursday, when she rang the doorbell, she could already hear the hurried little footsteps on the other side of the door. "Who is it?" June's voice called out, following the ritual they had established. "It's me, the story deliverer," Sadie replied, following the same script. The door opened and there was June, her blonde hair braided more skillfully than the first few times Sadie had learned to braid during that month. The girl wore a green dress with small embroidered flowers and colorful socks. "Doris, you're here," June exclaimed, as if every meeting were a wonderful surprise, even though it was part of a routine. Sadie came in, hanging her jacket on the now familiar hook near the door. The smell of the house, a mix of books, lavender from the fabric softener, and something indefinable that was simply the scent of a home, no longer seemed strange to her. Miles appeared in the hallway, coming from his office. He had headphones around his neck, probably having interrupted a work call to greet her. "Hi, Sadie," he said with a quick smile. "I have an important meeting today. I'll probably be in the office until about 4. There are snacks in the fridge, and June has already had lunch." "No problem," Sadie replied, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. He looked more tired than usual. "Are we playing school today?" June asked, pulling Sadie's hand toward the living room. "Of course," Sadie agreed, letting herself be led. "Can I be the student this time?" June laughed, a crystal-clear sound that seemed to light up the whole house. "No, I'm the student. You're always the teacher." Miles watched the interaction for a moment, a soft smile on his lips, before heading back to his office. Sadie noticed how tense his shoulders seemed, as if he were carrying an invisible weight. The afternoon followed the pattern they had established over the month. First a snack, today apples cut into the shape of a rabbit, a technique Sadie had learned from an online video just to see June's surprised smile. Then, time for activities, drawings, board games, or the game of school that June loved so much. The girl was smart and curious, always full of questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? How do birds know where to fly? Where do dreams come from? Questions that Sadie tried to answer as best she could, sometimes making up stories when she didn't know the exact answer, sometimes promising to look it up for the next time. That afternoon, as they colored in an activity book about sea animals together, Sadie noticed how different June seemed from the shy child she had met on that rainy night. Now she chattered non-stop, laughed loudly, and made simple but enthusiastic jokes. It was as if a flower had bloomed right before her eyes. "Sadie," June said suddenly, looking up from the dolphin she was coloring an unlikely shade of purple. "Do you have a best friend?" The question caught Sadie off guard. She stopped coloring a starfish and thought for a moment. "No," she answered honestly. I don't. Why not? June asked, the simplicity of the question hiding its complexity. Sadie considered an evasive answer, something to protect June from the harshness of certain realities. But there was something in the girl's attentive blue eyes that asked for honesty. Because sometimes people get so busy surviving that they forget to make friends, she said finally. June frowned, processing the information. Yes, that's sad, she declared with the ruthless frankness of children. A little, Sadie agreed, but it's okay. June went back to coloring her purple dolphin, her face concentrated. Sadie thought the subject was closed, but a few minutes later, without looking up from the paper, June said, "You're my friend." The words, simple and direct, hit Sadie like an unexpected wave. She looked at June, who continued coloring calmly, as if she hadn't said anything extraordinary, as if she hadn't just offered one of the most precious gifts anyone can give. Sadie was quiet for a moment. No one had called her that in a very long time. In fact, she couldn't remember the last time someone had considered her a friend, not just a co-worker or an acquaintance. "You're my friend too, June," she finally replied, surprised by the emotion choking her voice. June smiled, satisfied, and reached for a blue pencil. "I know," she said simply. That evening, after Miles came back from the office and June proudly showed off all the drawings they had made during the afternoon, Sadie was getting ready to leave when she noticed something. June was showing Miles a new game they had invented, explaining the complex rules with the typical enthusiasm of a 6-year-old. Miles nodded, smiled at the right moments, and asked occasional questions. But his eyes, Sadie could see it clearly, were distant, as if part of him was stuck somewhere else, in some unresolved problem or persistent worry. And June, despite her apparent excitement, glanced at her father every few seconds, as if checking to see if he was still there, really there. It was a subtle look, almost imperceptible if you weren't looking for it, a look that said much more than words ever could. "I think I'll be going," Sadie announced, grabbing her jacket. "No," June protested immediately. "Stay for dinner. Right, Daddy. Can Sadie stay for dinner?" Miles seemed to snap out of his thoughts. Of course, if she wants to," he said, looking at Sadie with a tired smile. "I was thinking of ordering Chinese food." "You don't have to bother," Sadie began, but June was already bouncing around her. "Please, stay. We can eat with chopsticks and everything." How could she say no to those pleading blue eyes? Sadie agreed, and soon they were sitting at the kitchen table, sharing boxes of kung pao chicken, spring rolls, and fried rice. June skillfully tried to use the chopsticks, failing more than succeeding, but refusing any offer of a fork. "Daddy, look how I'm holding them just like Sadie taught me," June exclaimed, proudly holding up the chopsticks. Miles looked, smiled, and praised her. But again, Sadie noticed that slight distance in his eyes, as if a part of him were watching the scene from very far away. When June left to get a drawing she wanted to show them, Sadie gathered her courage. "Is everything okay?" she asked Miles. He seemed surprised by the question, as if he wasn't used to being asked about his own well-being. "Yeah, just tired. Too much work, I guess." Sadie hesitated, then decided to take a risk. "She misses you," she said softly, "even when you're in the room." The words seemed to hit Miles like an unexpected punch. He opened his mouth to reply, but then closed it, his eyes shifting to the hallway where June had disappeared. "I'm here," he said finally, his voice low. "I work from home so I can be present." "I know," Sadie agreed gently, "and she knows it too. But sometimes being physically present isn't the same as being present." It was bold of her, perhaps even inappropriate, to speak to her employer like that. But in that month, Sadie had observed the dynamic between father and daughter with eyes that knew loneliness all too well. She saw how June constantly sought her father's attention, how Miles tried to divide himself between work and fatherhood, how they both seemed to orbit each other without truly connecting. To her surprise, Miles didn't seem offended. On the contrary, he ran a hand through his hair in a familiar gesture of frustration and sighed. "How?" he asked simply. "How do I do this better?" The question was so honest, so vulnerable, that it caught Sadie off guard. This man, who had his own house, a stable job, who seemed to have all the answers, was asking for her help. Small things, she suggested, thinking of everything she had observed over the past few weeks. Tell her a story before bed, without looking at your phone. Have a snack together in the afternoon, even if it's just for 15 minutes. Get down on the floor and play with her. Really play, not just supervise. Miles listened attentively, as if mentally taking notes of every word. She loves it when you get involved in her games, Sadi continued. When you create stories together, or when you ask about the drawings she makes. Those moments, they're what make her eyes really light up. June came running back with a drawing in her hands, interrupting the conversation. It was a scene from a park, with 3 stick figures, a small one with yellow hair, a taller one also with yellow hair, and another tall one with brown hair. That's us, she announced proudly. At the park. How can we go on Saturday? Miles looked at the drawing, then at June, and finally at Sadi. Something changed in his gaze, a decision being made, a realization occurring. Of course we can, he said, and this time his smile reached his eyes. Actually, how about we go tomorrow after school? I can cancel my afternoon meeting. June's face lit up like a beacon. Really? Promise? Promise, Miles said, and then, to Sadi's surprise, he knelt down to June's level and hugged her. And we can bring bread for the ducks, just like we used to. Yes, June shouted, jumping for joy. And is Sadi coming too? Miles looked at Sadi, a silent question in his eyes. Tomorrow is my delivery day, Sadi said, feeling a pang of disappointment she hadn't expected. But you two will have a lot of fun. In the days and weeks that followed, Sadi noticed subtle changes in the house on Parkview Lane. Miles began to take more frequent breaks from his work to spend time with June. He started having dinner with them occasionally, even on the days she wasn't supposed to stay. She watched as Miles made an effort to implement her suggestions. He sat on the floor to play with building blocks, listened attentively to the elaborate stories June made up, and made a point to turn off his phone during dinner. And June, in response, blossomed. Her smile, already bright before, now seemed to light up the entire house. She constantly talked about the adventures she had with her dad, how they had gone to the museum on Sunday, how he had taught her to ride a bike without training wheels, how they had made cookies together, even though they were a little burnt. Without realizing it, Sadi had become the link that had reconnected father and daughter. Her observations, born from the experience of someone who knew absence, had helped Miles see what was right in front of his eyes, but that, for some reason, he couldn't fully see. One Thursday, while helping June with a small puzzle, the girl said suddenly, "Daddy said you're magic." Sadi laughed, surprised. "Magic? Why?" "He said you made our house happy again," June replied, fitting a piece with concentration. "Before it was just quiet." Sadi felt a lump in her throat. It wasn't magic she had performed. It was just having recognized in June and Miles a form of loneliness she knew all too well, the loneliness of being near someone and still feeling distant. That evening, when Miles came home from the office earlier than usual, he found Sadi and June in the living room, surrounded by pillows and sheets that formed an elaborate fort. "What do we have here?" he asked, a genuine smile lighting up his tired face. "It's our castle," June explained, emerging from the makeshift structure. "Sadi is the queen, I'm the warrior princess, and you." She paused dramatically. "So you can be the good dragon who protects the castle." "A good dragon, am I?" Miles asked, arching an eyebrow at Sadi, who was watching the scene with a smile. "The best castles always have one," Sadi replied. To June's surprise and delight, Miles immediately joined in the game. He took off his shoes, loosened his tie, and joined them in the fort, pretending to be a dragon with exaggerated roars that made June roll with laughter. Watching father and daughter play together, their faces lit by the same simple joy, Sadi felt something warm inside her. In that moment, she understood that she had found not just a job, but something she never really had, a place where she was wanted, where her presence mattered, where someone considered her a friend. And maybe, just maybe, she had also found a form of family she never imagined possible. Autumn arrived, painting the trees of Parkview Lane in shades of red and gold. 3 months had passed since Sadi had started looking after June. 3 months that had transformed a lonely delivery driver into an essential part of a small family's routine. That Thursday, the sky dawned grey, with a promise of rain that didn't materialize during the day but hung in the air like a constant possibility. The kind of day that invited one to stay indoors with hot chocolate and blankets. Sadie and June spent the afternoon putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle, an ambitious challenge for a 6-year-old, but June had insisted they could do it together. The puzzle depicted a medieval castle surrounded by forests and mountains. June was especially focused on the sky pieces, which she found easiest to identify. "Look, Sadie, I found another blue piece," she exclaimed, triumphantly, holding up a piece that completed a small patch of sky. "Great work, Detective June," Sadie replied, using the nickname she had created for the girl, who loved to pretend she was solving mysteries. Miles appeared at the living room door, watching them in silence for a moment. In recent weeks, he had started finishing work earlier, especially on Thursdays, which had silently become the day Sadie had dinner with them. "How's the investigation going?" he asked, playing along. "They were close to solving the case of the missing sky," June answered with mock seriousness, making Miles laugh. "Well, detectives need energy. How about pizza for dinner?" "Yes!" June jumped up, nearly knocking over some of the puzzle pieces. "With pineapple? Half with pineapple for the crazy detective, half margarita for the sensible adults," Miles joked, picking up his phone to place the order. Sadie watched the interaction with a smile. There was a lightness to Miles that hadn't been there when she first met him. The perpetually worried man with distant eyes now laughed more, played more, and seemed more present in his own life. The pizza arrived, and the three of them sat at the kitchen table. June excitedly talked about the science project she was doing at school, something about the water cycle, with cotton balls and blue food coloring. "So tomorrow is presentation day for the class," she explained, grabbing another slice of pizza. "The teacher said it looks really nice." "I'm sure it looks amazing," Miles said, proud. "I will go over everything you're going to say after dinner, okay?" When they finished eating, Miles helped June prepare her presentation, while Sadie started clearing the table and washing the dishes from lunch that had been left behind. The scene was so domestic, so comfortable, that sometimes Sadie had to remind herself that she was just a babysitter, not a permanent part of this family. After June went to bed, with a story told by Miles and a goodnight kiss from Sadie, the two adults finished cleaning up the kitchen. Miles washed the glasses used during dinner, while Sadie dried and put them away. They worked in a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who no longer need to fill every moment with words. "She's happy," Miles said suddenly, breaking the silence. His hands continued the mechanical work of washing the glasses, but his eyes were fixed on the kitchen window, which reflected his own thoughts more than it showed the night outside. "June is a happy child," Sadie agreed, folding the dish towel. "She has a bright spirit." "It wasn't always like this," Miles continued, his voice low, almost as if he were talking to himself. "There was a time when she barely spoke, barely smiled." Sadie remained silent, sensing that Miles needed to say something he had been holding in for a long time. "Her mother left when June was a baby," he said at last, the words coming out as if they had waited years to be spoken. "She never came back." The silence that followed that revelation wasn't uncomfortable. It was like the silence that comes after a thunderstorm, a moment of acknowledging that something powerful has just happened. Sadie put the last glass in the cabinet, choosing her next words carefully. She didn't want to offer empty platitudes or false sympathy. "How was it for you?" she asked, simply. Miles turned off the faucet and dried his hands, still not looking directly at Sadie. "At first I told June that Mommy was traveling, that she would be back soon. Later, that she was working far away. Eventually I stopped lying, but I also didn't know how to tell the truth." He sighed deeply. "How do you tell a 3-year-old that her mother chose not to stay?" Sadie thought of June, of her open smile, her eyes full of hope and trust. She thought of the drawing the girl had made weeks ago, 3 stick figures, a father, a daughter, and herself. No empty space, no missing figure. "Sometimes," Miles continued, "June asks about her. Not often, but it happens. And every time I freeze, I don't know what to say." He finally turned to face Sadie. What do I tell her? That her mother preferred a career in Paris to being a mum. That she found us insufficient. There was so much pain in that last word that Sadi felt as if she could touch the still open wound in the man's heart. When I was 8, Sadi said calmly, I asked my dad why my mom never came to visit me. He gave me an elaborate explanation about how she was busy, how she loved me even from a distance. She paused. All I wanted to hear was that I still had him, that he wouldn't leave too. Miles was watching her attentively now, absorbing every word. She doesn't need answers, Sadi said softly. She just needs someone who stays. The words hung between them, simple yet profound. Miles closed his eyes for a moment, as if allowing that truth to fully sink in. When he opened them again, Sadi saw something in them she hadn't seen before. A recognition, an understanding that went beyond words. You get it, he said, not as a question, but as a realization. Tassie, you really get it. Sadi nodded slightly. She understood what it was like to have an empty space where someone should be. She understood what it was like to build a life around an absence, and more importantly, she understood what it was like to finally start filling that space with something new, something unexpected. Miles took a step forward and, to Sadi's surprise, took her hand. A simple gesture, not romantic but deeply human, the kind of contact that says, you're not alone in this. Thank you, he said, his voice low but firm, for staying. In that moment, Sadi realized that something fundamental had changed between them. It wasn't just June who had found a friend in Sadi. Miles, too, had found someone who saw him, really saw him, with his struggles, his fears, his imperfections. For the first time, he felt seen, too. When Sadi finally left that night, the rain that had been threatening all day began to fall, but she didn't mind. She pedaled under the dark sky, feeling the drops on her face, mixing with tears she didn't quite know why she was shedding. Maybe because, after so long alone, she had also found people who saw her, people who wanted her around, people to whom her presence mattered, and that, she realized, was the closest thing to a home she had felt in a very, very long time. December arrived, bringing with it the sharp chill of winter and the promise of the holiday season. The house on Parkview Lane gained a modest but carefully decorated Christmas tree, with ornaments June had made at school and colorful lights that twinkled merrily in the increasingly long nights. It was a Friday, and although it wasn't normally a day for Sadi to look after June, Miles had an important video conference he couldn't reschedule. A special favor, he had asked, seeming genuinely embarrassed to break their established routine. Sadi accepted readily, cancelling a few deliveries, something she would never have done a few months ago. The snow had started falling in the morning, turning the world outside into a postcard scene. Large white flakes danced in the air before joining the white blanket that already covered the yard and the roofs of the neighboring houses. Sadi and June watched the snow from the living room window, their breaths fogging up the glass. Can we build a snowman later? June asked, her blue eyes sparkling with anticipation. If the snow lets up a bit, yes, Sadi replied. But it's coming down really hard right now. How about we draw in the meantime? June agreed enthusiastically. Drawing was one of her favorite activities, especially with Sadi, who, unlike many adults, took her artistic creations seriously and always asked questions about every detail. They spread paper and colored pencils on the coffee table in the living room. June decided to draw her house under the snow, with stick figures representing her dad, and of course Sadi, building a snowman in the yard. Sadi, for her part, drew a snow-covered forest scene with a red fox, June's favorite animal, walking among the trees. Your fox is wearing a scarf, June observed, laughing. Thai foxes don't wear scarves. This one does, Sadi replied with feigned seriousness. It's a very elegant fox and sensitive to the cold. June laughed even harder, a crystal-clear sound that filled the room with a joy that seemed almost tangible. In recent months, Sadi had become an expert at coaxing out that laugh, discovering it was one of the most comforting sounds she had ever heard. Look, I made you with super long hair. June pointed to her drawing, where the figure representing Sadi had yellow lines descending almost to the floor. Wow, I'll have to grow my hair out a lot to get it that long, Sadi joked, touching her own blonde locks that barely passed her shoulders. "You'd look pretty," June declared, with the absolute conviction that only children possess. Then, leaning closer as if sharing an important secret, she added, "Daddy says you have a pretty smile." Sadie felt her cheeks grow warm. "Oh, does he? When did he say that?" "The other day when you left. I said I like it when you smile, and he said he likes it too." June picked up a blue pencil and started coloring the sky in her drawing. "He smiles more now, you know?" "That's good," Sadie replied, trying to ignore the warmth spreading through her chest at that revelation. "Your dad works hard. He deserves to smile more." They continued to draw in a comfortable silence, interrupted only by the soft sound of pencils on paper and the occasional comment about their drawings. Outside, the snow continued to fall, isolating them from the world in a white, silent cocoon. "Sadie," June said suddenly, still focused on her drawing, "why do some people have a mommy and some people don't?" The question caught Sadie off guard. She put her pencil down on the table, giving the girl her full attention. "Well," she began carefully, "families are all different. Some have a mommy and a daddy, some just a mommy, some just a daddy. Some have two daddies or two mommies, and some have other people who take care of them, like grandparents or aunts and uncles." June nodded, absorbing the information as she continued to color. "My friend Lily has a mommy and a daddy," she commented. "They brought cupcakes to class for her birthday." "That was nice of them," Sadie replied, carefully watching June's face, trying to understand where this conversation was heading. "For my birthday, will you come to my class?" June asked, looking up for the first time. "If your dad wants me to and the school allows it, of course I will," Sadie promised. June smiled, satisfied with the answer, and went back to her drawing. A few more minutes passed in silence. Sadie began to relax, thinking the conversation about mothers was over. "Sadie," June called again, this time dropping her pencil and looking directly at her. There was an intensity in her blue eyes that seemed much older than her 6 years. "You're my friend. But you could be my mum." Time seemed to freeze. The words hung in the air between them, huge and impossible to ignore. Sadie felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Silence. What do you say to something like that? How do you react when a child offers, so simply and directly, something so profoundly significant? Sadie smiled, a discreet, restrained smile. A smile that hid the storm of emotions that had been unleashed inside her. Because inside, something was crumbling. All the walls carefully built over years of disappointments and losses, all the protections erected to not care too much, to not get attached, to not dream of belonging. It all came crashing down with those simple, childish words. She had been chosen. By this small person with sincere eyes and a heart bigger than the world. Chosen not for her utility, not for convenience, but for who she was, and that both hurt and healed at the same time. It hurt because Sadie knew it wasn't that simple, because there were realities, complications, boundaries that a 6-year-old couldn't understand. Because allowing herself to dream of this, of truly being part of this family, was to risk a kind of pain she wasn't sure she could endure again. And it healed because, for the first time in her adult life, someone looked at her and said, "You are enough. You are the one I choose. You are the one I want to stay." "June," Sadie began, her voice hoarser than she intended, "that's one of the most beautiful things anyone has ever said to me." The girl waited, her eyes fixed on her, clearly expecting more than that. "Being your friend is very special to me," Sadie continued, choosing each word with care. "And being here with you and your dad, it means a lot." "So you want to?" June asked, the pure hope in her voice nearly breaking Sadie's heart. How do you explain to a child that adult life was full of complications, that families weren't formed just by wishing, that there was more at stake than simply wanting? "That's not something I can decide on my own," Sadie replied gently, "or that you can decide on your own, but," she took a deep breath, "I'm very honored that you see me that way." June seemed to process this for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then, with the surprising adaptability of children, she simply shrugged. "Okay, but you're still coming to my birthday, right?" Sadie laughed, relief mixing with the raw emotion still in her chest. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Satisfied, June returned to her drawing, but Sadi remained motionless for a moment, looking at the concentrated child in front of her. This small person who, without knowing it, had just changed everything. Because now that the words had been spoken, they couldn't be ignored. The thought Sadi had been carefully avoiding for months was now present, real and undeniable. At some point, without realizing it, she had begun to love this child, to love this small, makeshift family, to wish it were hers too. And that was both the most precious gift and the most terrifying thing she had ever experienced. June's words echoed in Sadi's mind like a ceaseless refrain. You could be my mom. Simple, direct, devastating in their childlike honesty. A week had passed since that snowy afternoon of drawing, and Sadi couldn't stop thinking about them. The routine continued. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays at the house on Parkview Lane. Snacks prepared, stories told, homework supervised. But something had changed inside her, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, yet as deep as an abyss. On Thursday, Sadi arrived earlier than usual. Miles was finishing a call in his office and waved to her from the doorway, silently mouthing 5 minutes. June wasn't back from school yet. The bus would drop her off at the corner in about half an hour. Alone in the kitchen, Sadi started preparing June's afternoon snack, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, an apple cut into star shapes, and the hot chocolate the girl loved on cold winter days. Her movements were automatic, familiar. She knew exactly where every item was stored, knew June's exact preferences, even the specific cup, the blue one with cloud designs, that the girl preferred. It was while reaching for that cup in the cabinet that something hit her with the force of a physical blow. She knew this kitchen better than her own. She felt more at home here, in this space that didn't belong to her, than in the small apartment where she slept. Sadi sat down at the kitchen table, the cloud-patterned cup still in her hand. What was she doing? Where was the line that separated work from personal involvement? And when exactly had she crossed it? Her eyes scanned the kitchen, noticing the small details that made the space special. June's drawing pinned to the fridge with colorful magnets, showing the 3 figures, her, Miles, Sadi, holding hands. The calendar on the wall, where Miles carefully noted June's school events and the days Sadi would come. The plant on the windowsill that she herself had given them last month, saying, every house needs something living growing in it. It's just a job, Sadi muttered to herself, placing the cup on the table with more force than she intended. And here I am, wanting to stay. The truth, finally admitted aloud, hung in the kitchen air like a confession. She wanted to stay, not just as a nanny, not just as an employee. She wanted to belong to this place, to these people. She wanted to be part of this family that, without realizing it, she had started to consider her own. And that terrified her. Because Sadi Wilkins knew exactly what happened when you started to depend on other people, when you started to believe you had found a place to call home. Life had taught her that lesson repeatedly. Everything you love can be, and eventually will be, taken from you. Miles appeared at the kitchen door, interrupting her thoughts. He was smiling, that warm smile that had become more frequent and less tired in recent months. Sorry about that, he said, referring to the call. How was your day? A simple, casual question. The kind of question people who care about each other ask. The kind of question that makes you feel seen. Quiet, Sadi replied, forcing a smile. Just a few deliveries this morning. Miles came closer, pouring himself some coffee. There was an ease in the way they moved in the same space, an unrehearsed choreography of 2 people accustomed to each other's presence. June has been talking non-stop about the school's winter festival, he commented, sitting at the table across from Sadi. Apparently, you promised to help her make paper snowflakes to decorate the classroom. I did, Sadi confirmed, remembering the conversation. We can do that today after her snack. Miles watched her for a moment, a look that seemed to see through her carefully constructed defenses. Is everything okay, Sadi? The question caught her off guard. It was so simple, so direct, and so hard to answer honestly. Of course, she said quickly, just a little tired. Miles nodded, though his eyes said he wasn't completely convinced. There was a moment of silence between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with something unsaid. "You know," he began hesitantly, "I was thinking, Christmas is coming up, and June and I usually just do something small, just the two of us. But this year I thought maybe—" The sound of the school bus stopping at the corner interrupted what Miles was about to say. Moments later, they heard the front door open and June's hurried footsteps down the hall. "I'm home," she announced, bursting into the kitchen like a small hurricane of energy. Upon seeing Sadie, her face lit up with that smile that made everything worthwhile. "Sadie, you're already here." And then she was there, hugging Sadie with that all-in intensity only children can manage, as if every reunion were precious and long-awaited. Sadie returned the hug automatically, feeling the warmth of that small body against hers, the scent of children's shampoo and cold winter air in the blonde hair. And it was as if something inside her broke completely. Because this hug, this child, this man watching them with a tender smile, this warm kitchen on a cold winter day, was everything she had ever wanted and never allowed herself to desire. It was the perfect definition of home. And it was an illusion. "Are we making snowflakes today?" June asked, pulling away to look at Sadie with expectation in her blue eyes, the same eyes that a week ago had said they wanted her to be their mom. "Of course," Sadie replied, keeping the smile on her face through sheer force of will. "After your snack." The afternoon proceeded like so many others before it. Snack, homework, paper crafts. Laughter, conversations, moments of quiet concentration. To any observer, it would have been a perfectly normal, even cozy scene. But inside Sadie, a storm was brewing. Every laugh from June, every gentle glance from Miles, every moment of belonging hurt like an open wound, because she knew it wasn't real, it couldn't be. They weren't her family. This wasn't her home. She was just a babysitter, an employee, a person passing through their lives. And the more she allowed herself to believe otherwise, the more devastating it would be when it inevitably ended. When night fell and Miles suggested she stay for dinner, something that had become almost a tradition on Thursdays, Sadie refused, claiming a headache that wasn't entirely fabricated. "Are you sure?" Miles asked, concern evident on his face. "I can make some tea or—" "I'm fine," Sadie interrupted, more sharply than she intended. Softening her tone, she added, "I just need to rest a bit. I'll see you on Monday." June's goodbye hug was especially tight that night, as if the girl sensed something was wrong. "You promise you'll be back?" she asked, looking up at Sadie with those eyes that seemed to see too much. "Of course," Sadie replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Monday, like always." But as she pedaled back to her empty apartment that night, Sadie knew she was lying. The weekend was a torture of indecision. Sadie oscillated between moments of determination, it was just a job, she would find another, and moments of weakness, when she picked up her phone to send a message to Miles, to say everything was fine, that she would see them on Monday. But the truth she finally admitted to herself on Sunday night, was that she was scared. Scared of wanting too much, of hoping too much, of feeling too much. Scared of believing she could really have a place in that family, only to find out she was wrong. It was better to leave now by her own choice than to wait until there was no more room for her. On Monday morning, Sadie woke before dawn. With methodical, almost mechanical movements, she packed her small backpack with the few belongings that mattered. She left the apartment without looking back, the key on the table along with the month's rent. She pedaled to Parkview Lane one last time, but much earlier than usual, when she knew the house would still be quiet, its occupants likely still asleep. She took the envelope she had prepared from her pocket. Inside, besides the brief note, was the previous week's pay that Miles had given her. She couldn't accept it, not after doing this to them. She hesitated for a long moment before sliding the envelope under the door. It was more than I ever thought I'd have, and because of that, I have to go. Words insufficient to explain everything she felt, everything she feared, but they were the only ones she could manage to write. That same morning, when Miles came downstairs and found the envelope, he knew instantly. A part of him had perhaps been expecting this, fearing it. People who have spent their whole lives losing things develop a sixth sense for abandonment. He opened the envelope with trembling fingers, read the few words written in the now familiar handwriting. The pain was immediate and intense, like a punch to the gut, not just for himself but especially for what he would have to tell June. How do you explain to a 6-year-old child, who had already lost one mother, that the person she had begun to trust, to whom she had offered her heart, had also left? When June came down for breakfast, Miles tried to find the right words, the gentle words, but there are no gentle words for abandonment. "Sadie isn't coming anymore, sweetheart," he said finally, his heart breaking as he saw his daughter's eyes fill with confusion, then understanding, and finally a pain far too adult for such a small child. "She promised," June whispered, tears starting to stream down her cheeks. "First, she promised she'd come back." Miles hugged her, holding her as she cried, feeling completely helpless. What assurances could he offer his daughter when life had already shown her, for the second time, that people simply leave? The days that followed were silent, heavy. June reverted to being the quiet, withdrawn child she was before Sadie entered their lives. She ate little, spoke even less. At school, her teacher called, worried about the sudden change in behavior. Miles tried to move on, hired another babysitter, an older, competent and kind woman. But the house felt hollow, empty in a way that had nothing to do with physical space and everything to do with the absence of a specific laugh, of a pair of light eyes, of a presence that, without them realizing it, had become essential. It was 2 weeks later that Miles found the drawing. He was tidying up June's room, putting away scattered toys, when he saw a carefully folded piece of paper on her desk. Normally, he wouldn't have looked, respecting his daughter's privacy, even at her young age. But something, instinct perhaps, made him open the paper. It was a simple drawing done with colored pencils. 3 stick figures holding hands, a small one with yellow hair, a taller one with brown hair, and between them, a medium-sized figure with yellow hair. Underneath, in the careful, still clumsy handwriting of a child learning to write, it said, "My friend, almost Mom." Miles sat on June's bed, the drawing trembling in his hands. A wave of emotions washed over him, sadness, regret, and finally, a clarity he hadn't felt in a long time. Because in that moment, looking at his daughter's innocent drawing, Miles understood what he hadn't said, what he should have said. He understood that Sadie wasn't just June's babysitter or a comforting presence in their lives. She had become a part of them, part of the definition of family they were rebuilding. And he, so worried about protecting his heart and June's from more pain, had let Sadie believe she was disposable, temporary, just an employee. When the truth was that she had become indispensable, not for what she did but for who she was. Miles carefully folded the drawing and put it in his pocket. The house was silent, empty in a way he now fully understood. It was time to find Sadie, to say what he should have said before it was too late. Because some people don't just leave, some people need to be invited to stay. January arrived, bringing with it a biting cold and perpetually grey skies. Sadie had returned to her old delivery routine, cycling through the city streets from morning till night, an anonymous face bringing food to strangers. The weeks since she had left the house on Parkview Lane had dragged on, each day identical to the last, empty of meaning. She had found a new apartment, smaller than the last, in an even more remote neighborhood. A place to sleep, nothing more. She hadn't even bothered to unpack all the boxes. What for? It made no difference. The delivery app on her phone beeped, "New order, Thai Palace, deliver to 78 Wellington Street." Sadie accepted mechanically, tucking the phone into her coat pocket. She looked up at the sky. Dark clouds were gathering, heralding a storm. Another night cycling in the rain. At the restaurant, she picked up the order without really registering what it was. Rice, noodles, curry. It didn't matter. She checked the address again and got on her bike, feeling the first drops of rain touch her face. As she pedaled, the rain intensified, quickly turning into a downpour. Water streamed down her face, down her back despite her raincoat. The icy wind cut at her cheeks like tiny blades of ice, but Sadie barely felt the physical discomfort. Lately, nothing really reached her, not the cold, not hunger, not fatigue. It was as if a layer of numbness enveloped her, protecting her from feeling anything at all. Arriving at Wellington Street, she slowed down, looking for number 78. The building was an old warehouse converted into a commercial space, with a few small businesses and offices. At this time of night, almost all the windows were dark, except for one on the ground floor, which emitted a yellowish light. Sadi parked her bike, took the order from the thermal bag, and walked to the entrance, the rain falling mercilessly on her. She rang the bell next to the glass door and waited, water dripping from her hair and clothes, forming a small puddle at her feet. The door opened, and there he was, Miles. For a moment, Sadi thought she was hallucinating. That exhaustion, hunger and rain had conspired to create a cruel mirage of the man she had been desperately trying to forget for the past few weeks. But no. It was really him, standing in the doorway, without an umbrella, looking at her with those eyes that always seemed to see through her defenses. He was wearing jeans and a dark blue sweater she recognized, the same one he wore the night they first met, when she had slipped on his porch. "What?" Sadi began, her voice nearly inaudible over the sound of the rain. "What are you doing here?" Miles took a step forward, out from under the protection of the entryway and into the rain, moving closer to her. The water immediately began to soak his hair, his sweater, but he didn't seem to notice. "Looking for you," he answered simply. Sadi felt her heart race, a sudden rush of emotion breaking through the carefully cultivated numbness of the past weeks. "How?" She tried again, her voice failing. "It wasn't easy," Miles said, a small smile curving his lips, despite the rain running down his face. "You didn't leave an address, a phone number, nothing. I tried the delivery company, but they couldn't give out information, so I started ordering food every day from different restaurants, hoping you would eventually show up." Sadi blinked, trying to process what she was hearing, the rain mixing with the tears that were starting to form in her eyes. "Why?" she asked, the only question that mattered. Miles took another step toward her. They were both soaked now, the rain falling mercilessly on them, just like that first night. "Because we miss you," he said, his voice soft but clear, perfectly audible even over the roar of the storm. "You brought my daughter back, and you brought me back with her, and now I'm here. Because we miss you." The words hit Sadi like waves crashing against rocks, tearing down one by one the walls she had built around her heart. "I couldn't stay," she said, the words coming out in broken gasps. "It was too much. June. She asked me, and I wanted to say yes so badly." "I know." Miles nodded, the understanding in his eyes almost painful to see. "She told me that she asked you to be her mum." Sadi closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the rain on her face, mixing with the tears that now fell freely. "I couldn't," she repeated, opening her eyes to face Miles. "It wasn't my place. It wasn't my right." "What if it was?" Miles asked, his voice so low Sadi almost didn't hear it. What if it could be? Something broke inside Sadi in that moment, a dam of emotions held back for years, for a lifetime of loss and loneliness. Suddenly, there on the sidewalk, under the pouring rain, she was truly crying, not silent tears, but sobs that shook her entire body. Miles took the final step that separated them, and, without hesitation, wrapped her in his arms. Sadi allowed herself to be held, the warmth of his body contrasting with the cold of the rain, creating a small island of comfort in the midst of the storm. "I'm scared," she confessed against his shoulder, the words almost swallowed by her sobs. "I'm so scared." "Of what?" Miles asked, his gentle voice close to her ear. "Of wanting too much. Of believing I can have this. A family." Sadi pulled back slightly, just enough to look into his eyes. "I've always dreamed of being a mother, but I never told anyone. My parents died when I was 13. Since then, it's just been me against the world." For the first time, she was saying her story out loud. The words she had kept buried so deep inside herself, she had almost forgotten them. "I went from foster home to foster home until I was 18, she continued, the words now flowing like the rain itself. "Nobody keeps troubled teenagers for long. I learned not to get attached, not to expect anything, and then You two happened. Miles listened to her in silence, his eyes never leaving hers, even as water streamed between them. June looked at me like I was someone important, Sadie continued. Like I belonged there, and I started to believe it. I started to want it, and that terrified me. So you ran, Miles completed, not as an accusation, but as an understanding. Before you realized you didn't need me, Sadie confirmed, her voice now almost a whisper. Before I had to hear that I was just a nanny, just someone passing through your lives. Miles raised a hand to her face, gently brushing away the wet hair sticking to her cheeks. Sadie, he said, her name in his voice sounding like something precious. You are not someone passing through our lives. You're a part of them now. June isn't the only one who misses you. I do too. Something in the way he said those words, in the way his eyes held hers, made Sadie hold her breath. The house is empty without you, Miles continued. Not just because there's no one to look after June, but because you brought life back to that place. To both of us. Sadie wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe him so much it hurt. June hasn't stopped asking about you, he said. She keeps all the drawings you made together. She refuses to let anyone else sit in your spot at the table. And Miles hesitated, and for a moment, Sadie saw in him the same vulnerability she felt within herself. I realized something when you were gone, he continued at last. I realized it wasn't just June who was getting attached to you. I was too. And not just as someone who takes care of my daughter, but as someone I want in my life. In our life. The rain continued to fall around them, but Sadie barely noticed now. Her whole world had shrunk to this moment, to this man in front of her, saying words she never imagined she would hear. I'm asking you to come back, Miles said, his voice firm despite the emotion Sadie could see in his eyes. Not as a nanny, not as an employee, but as part of our family. In whatever way you want, at whatever pace you need. No pressure, no expectations, just come back. Sadie closed her eyes, feeling the rain on her face like a blessing, washing away old fears, deep pains. What if I mess it all up? She asked, the last barrier of fear still holding on. Miles smiled, a smile that reached his eyes, lighting up his face even in the storm. We all mess things up sometimes, he answered. I've certainly messed up plenty, but we can fix it together. That's what families do. Families. The word echoed inside Sadie like a promise, like a possibility she had never truly considered for herself. June will be so happy, Miles added softly. She's at home now with Mrs. Wilson from the apartment next door. I told her I had to go get something very important. Something important, Sadie repeated, a small smile beginning to form on her lips. To the most important thing, Miles confirmed, and then slowly, as if giving her all the time in the world to pull away if she wanted, he leaned in and touched his lips to hers. It was a soft, brief, almost hesitant kiss. A first kiss in the rain, the kind of thing Sadie thought only happened in movies she never watched. When Miles pulled away, there was a silent question in his eyes, and for the first time in her life, Sadie chose to believe. She chose hope over fear, possibility over the certainty of loneliness. Yes, she said simply, I'll come back. The smile that lit up Miles's face made all the cold, all the rain, all the years of loneliness worthwhile. Let's go home, he said, holding out his hand to her. Sadie handed the forgotten order to a laughing Miles, who left it at the building's front desk with a generous tip. She sent one last message to the delivery app, ending her shift, and perhaps that phase of her life. And then, for the second time, she followed Miles home. When they arrived at the house on Parkview Lane, it was still raining, though more softly now. The living room lights were on, casting a welcoming glow through the moisture-fogged windows. Mrs. Wilson answered the door, a warm smile on her wrinkled face as she saw the two of them soaked on the porch. I found what you were looking for, then, she asked Miles, her experienced eyes observing Sadie with approval. I did, Miles answered, gently squeezing the hand he was still holding. Mrs. Wilson said her goodbyes, promising to bring a cake the next day to celebrate what she called a new beginning. As she left, Sadie heard hurried footsteps coming down the stairs. And then June was there, stopping abruptly at the bottom of the stairs, her huge blue eyes fixed on Sadie as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Sadie," she whispered, her voice small and uncertain. "Hi, June," Sadie replied, feeling tears well up in her eyes again. For a long moment, the girl just stood there, staring. Then, with a cry of joy that Sadie thought she would never hear again, June ran, throwing herself into her arms with such force she nearly knocked her over. "You came back," June exclaimed between laughter and tears. "You came back, you came back." Sadie hugged her back, feeling the smallest warm body against her own, still cold from the rain. "I came back," she confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. "And this time I'm staying." June pulled away just enough to look into her face, the pure joy in her eyes almost painful to see. "Promise?" she asked, with all the seriousness a 6-year-old could muster. "I promise," Sadie replied, and for the first time, she knew she could keep that promise. Miles watched the scene with eyes shining with emotion. When June finally let go of Sadie, but only to take her hand and pull her inside, he came closer, placing a hand gently on her back. "Let's get dry and have dinner," he suggested. "Everything's ready." And it was. The table was set in the cozy kitchen. 3 plates, 3 glasses, 3 sets of silverware. As if they had been waiting, as if there had always been a place for her there. Sadie sat at the table, watching June chatter excitedly about everything that had happened in the weeks they were apart, while Miles served the meal he had prepared. It was a simple, everyday scene, a family gathering for dinner at the end of the day, except now she was a part of it. Not as a visitor, not as an employee, as a part. Outside, the rain continued to fall softly, the same kind of rain that had brought them together the first time. But this time, Sadie wasn't on the outside, looking in. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, finally home. Spring arrived on Parkview Lane, bringing with it blooming flowers in the gardens, longer days, and a gentle warmth that replaced the winter chill. 3 months had passed since the rainy night Sadie returned to Miles and June's house. 3 months of adjustments, discoveries, and a happiness that sometimes still felt too fragile to be real. Sadie had definitively quit her delivery job. She now divided her time between caring for June and a part-time job at a small bookstore downtown, something she discovered she loved almost as much as her afternoons with the girl. Her belongings, once confined to a tiny apartment, now occupied discreet but significant spaces throughout the house. Her books on the living room shelf, her clothes in the guest room closet, her favorite mug in the kitchen cabinet. It was a Sunday in April, the kind of perfect day that seems to come from a postcard. The sky was an impossible blue, without a single cloud, and a light breeze carried the scent of freshly bloomed flowers. Miles had suggested a picnic in the park, and the 3 of them spent the morning and early afternoon stretched out on a checkered blanket, eating sandwiches, playing frisbee, and feeding the ducks in the pond with small pieces of old bread. June had run around non-stop, her laughter echoing through the park as she chased soap bubbles that Sadie blew for her. Eventually, exhausted from so much play and sun, the girl had fallen asleep in the back seat of the car on the way home, her head resting gently on Sadie's lap. Now, with the sun beginning its descent on the horizon, Sadie was sitting on the back porch, looking at the small garden she had started cultivating in recent weeks. She had planted daisies, petunias, and a few sunflowers that were still just shy sprouts emerging from the dark earth. Miles had gone out to buy ice cream, a specific request from June before she fell asleep for iced tea when she woke up, and the house was wrapped in a quiet, welcoming silence. Sadie took a deep breath, smelling the fragrance of the flowers she had planted, mixed with the scent of damp earth. She had never had a garden before. She had never stayed in one place long enough to see the seeds she planted grow and bloom. It was a strange, new, and deeply satisfying feeling. The soft sound of the door opening announced Miles's return. He approached, 2 bowls of ice cream in his hands, his hair slightly tousled by the afternoon breeze. "Is June still asleep?" he asked, handing one of the bowls to Sadie. "Like a rock," she confirmed, accepting the ice cream with a smile. I think chasing the ducks completely wore her out. She didn't even wake up when I carried her to bed. Miles sat next to her on the porch step, their shoulders lightly touching. In the past few months, they had developed a comfortable intimacy, built on small moments like this, conversations at the end of the day, hands meeting when passing an object, shared glances over June's head during dinner. "She was so happy today," Miles commented, savoring his chocolate ice cream. "That laugh of hers, when she runs like that, carefree. It's the best sound in the world." "It really is," Sadie agreed, remembering the pure joy on June's face as they ran through the park. "She's an incredible kid." "Thanks to you, in large part," Miles said, his gaze meeting hers. "Before you showed up, she rarely laughed like that. You brought something back to her. To both of us." Sadie felt her cheeks warm, still not entirely used to receiving compliments or recognition. "You both did the same for me," she replied softly. "Maybe even more than I could ever explain." They sat in silence for a few moments, just watching the garden and the sky that was beginning to be tinged with the colors of the sunset, shades of pink and orange that seemed painted by an invisible artist. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who feel completely at ease in each other's presence. "You know," Sadie began, her gaze fixed on the small flower seedlings she had planted the previous week, "I've been thinking a lot lately." "About?" Miles asked, turning to watch her better. "About staying," she replied, the words coming out more easily than she expected. "About roots. About belonging." She paused, gathering the courage for the confession she was about to make. "I've never had a family. I've always been running. But here," her voice faltered slightly, "this is the first time I've wanted to stop." The confession hung between them, simple but profound. Miles placed his ice cream bowl on the step and gently took Sadie's hand in his. His fingers were cold from the ice cream, but his touch was warm, secure. "I'm happy to hear that," he said, his voice low and sincere, "because we want you to stay. I want you to stay. More than I can express." Sadie looked at their intertwined hands, feeling that familiar emotion grow in her chest, a mixture of hope and fear that had become her constant companion in recent months. "I'm still scared sometimes," she admitted, her voice little more than a whisper. "That one day you'll realize I don't belong here, that I'm not enough." Miles squeezed her hand lightly, his eyes never leaving hers. There was an intensity in his gaze that made Sadie want to look away, but at the same time prevented her from doing so. "Sadie," he said, her name sounding like a promise on his lips, "you are more than enough. You are exactly who we needed, even when we didn't know we were looking." He paused, his thumb drawing small circles on the back of her hand. "My daughter chose you, and so did I." The words touched Sadie in a deep place, a place she had spent her entire life protecting, hiding, fearing it would be hurt again, a place that, slowly, was learning to trust again. "I chose you too," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Even when I tried to run away, even when I was scared, deep down, I had already chosen." The look they exchanged then contained a whole universe of possibilities, of unsaid promises, of a future that finally seemed within reach. Miles leaned in slowly, his intention clear in his eyes. Sadie closed her eyes as their lips met, a sweet kiss, tasting of chocolate ice cream and fulfilled promises. Unlike the first kiss in the rain months ago, this one carried no questions or uncertainties. It was a confirmation, a seal on something they already knew to be true. When they separated, Miles kept his face close to hers, their foreheads almost touching. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I have for a while." "I love you too," Sadie replied, the words coming out easily, naturally, as if they had waited a lifetime to be said. The sound of the porch door opening made them pull apart slightly. June stood in the doorway, her hair tousled from sleep, rubbing her eyes with one hand while the other firmly held her favorite stuffed rabbit, a gift Sadie had given her for Christmas. "Hey, sleepyhead," Miles greeted her with a warm smile. "I brought you some ice cream." June smiled sleepily, walking over to them and settling comfortably between them on the porch step. Her star-patterned pajamas were wrinkled, and there was a pillow mark on her left cheek. "I dreamed about the park," she said, receiving the bowl of strawberry ice cream her father handed her. "And the ducks. And that the three of us lived in a treehouse, way up high, sir, where we could see all the stars." "A treehouse, huh?" Sadie asked, affectionately adjusting a strand of the girl's blonde hair. "That would be fun." "Yeah, and you would stay there forever," June continued, licking her ice cream with renewed enthusiasm. "Daddy said you're going to stay here forever too, right?" Sadie exchanged a quick glance with Miles, who nodded slightly, a small smile on his lips. "Yes, June," Sadie confirmed, feeling a certainty she had never experienced before. "I'm going to stay." June stopped eating her ice cream, looking at Sadie with a surprising intensity for such a young child. There was a question in her eyes, a question Sadie knew would come eventually, but for which she wasn't sure she was prepared. "Are you my real mum now?" June asked finally, her voice small but clear, carrying all the weight of childish hope. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Sadie felt her heart race, but not with fear, not this time. It was something different, a mix of responsibility, love, and a joy so intense it almost hurt. She looked at Miles, who was watching her with eyes full of love and trust, as if to say, "It's your choice. We're here, whatever your answer is." Then she turned her gaze back to June, whose open face showed all the vulnerability and hope of a child daring to dream of something she had lost. Sadie thought of all the moments that had brought them here. The rainy night she slipped on the porch steps, the unexpected dinner, the afternoons caring for June. The girl's innocent request, "You could be my mom," her escape, the return in the rain, and now this moment of decision, of commitment. "I am," Sadie answered, her voice firm and emotional. "And now, I have a family, too." The smile that lit up June's face in that moment was like the sunrise, bright, warm, full of promise. She dropped her ice cream bowl, which Miles skillfully caught before it fell, and threw her arms around Sadie's neck in a tight hug. "I knew it," June whispered against her neck. "I wished on the stars, every single night." Sadie hugged her back, feeling tears burn in her eyes. Miles moved closer, wrapping them both in his arms, creating a perfect circle of protection and belonging. The sun continued its descent on the horizon, painting the sky in ever deeper shades of pink and gold. In the small, newly planted garden, the first flowers of spring were slowly opening, living proof that new roots could grow in fertile soil, that what seemed dead could bloom again with the right care. Sadie Wilkins, who had spent her entire life believing there was no place to call her own, was finally home. It wasn't just the brick house on Parkview Lane, but the home they had built together, she, Miles, and June, made not of walls and roofs, but of daily choices, of small moments, of a family not born of blood, but built by the heart. A family that she had chosen, and that had chosen her back. Sitting there on the porch step, with the sun setting before her and the two people she loved most in the world by her side, Sadie finally understood what it meant to belong, and it was more beautiful than she had ever imagined. A gentle breeze passed through the garden, swaying the small sunflower seedlings that would one day turn to the sun, just as she had turned to this new life, this new chance. And for the first time, the future didn't seem like a distant, threatening horizon, but a bright promise of days like this, of hugs like this, of love like this, of family. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.